The shorthanded Kings continue to go in the wrong direction. That and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We would love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we are on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Well, the LA Kings lost again, this time to the Calgary Flames 4-2. We'll give you a recap of the game, talk about the pluses and minuses in just a moment. But a day later, still no update on the health status of Kings leading scorer Adrian Kempe, who was hurt in the final moments of Monday's loss in Edmonton when he fell awkwardly and appeared to hurt his left hand or wrist when he fell to the ice. Kings had a day off today before taking on the top team in the NHL, the Vancouver Canucks, on Thursday to wrap up their 3-game road trip. So no injury update on Adrian Kempe. We still don't know any further updates on Victor Arvidsson or Mikey Anderson or Carl Grundstrom. So not, unfortunately, a lot to be able to update you as far as the Kings' current roster, what the roster will look like in the near future, or what the roster could look like going into, hopefully, a playoff game. But still a lot of unknowns involving the LA Kings, unfortunately, at this point. So let's talk about the game last night in Calgary against the Flames. And we gave you a projected starting lineup in our preview episode going into that game. And the actual lineup was a bit different, and it would evolve as the game went on. We actually saw Pierre-Luc Dubois moved up to the top line, playing on the wing with Anze Kopitar and Quinton Byfield. Now, the second line did remain unchanged. Philip Deneau centering Kevin Fiala and Trevor Moore. Not a surprise there. The third line saw Blake Lizotte move up from the fourth line center spot, and he had Alex Laferriere and Arthur Kaliyev on his wings. Alex Turcotte would start off centering the fourth line with Jared Anderson-Dolan and Trevor Lewis. And the defensive pairs were a bit different as well. We had Jacob Moverara playing with Drew Doughty on the top pairing, Vladislav Gavrikov and Matt Roy on the second pairing, and a familiar pairing on the third pairing there with Jordan Spence and Andreas Englund. As for the game against the Flames, well, remember the Kings started off okay in Edmonton the previous game. They had a decent first and second period, but then kind of fell apart in the third period. So we were looking for the Kings to play 3 solid periods of hockey, but that was difficult to do with the Kings not getting off to a very good start in this one. Now, they didn't fall behind, but we'll detail exactly how that first period went in a minute for the Kings. But after the first period, no score between the Kings and the Flames. So perhaps a bit of good news. The Kings did not play a very good first period, and yet they were still even on the scoreboard. Now, things would change in the second period as LA would grab a 1-0 lead, a perfectly placed slap shot from Philip Deneau, his 11th goal of the season. Kevin Fiala and Drew Doughty getting the assist, but the Flames would respond almost immediately with not one, but 2 goals to grab a 2-1 lead before the Kings would respond on a pretty backhand shot from Kevin Fiala, his 17th of the season. Anze Kopitar and Quinton Byfield with the assists on that one. So we're even at 2-2 going into the third period, where the Kings didn't play great the game before in Edmonton. In the third, a better period for the Kings, but they still fell behind 3-2. Then they pull the goalie late and allow an empty net goal. Final score the same as it was the night before against the Oilers. Kings lose 4-2, this time to the Calgary Flames. As far as the game stats in this one, the Kings obviously lose 4-2. Shots on goal favored Calgary 37-23. As far as the power plays and the special teams, each team was 0 for 3 on the man advantage. Faceoffs won slightly favored Calgary 27-26. Block shots favored the Kings 22-14, and hits favored Calgary 29-17. to 19. But it was that stat, the shots on goal, that really stands out because the Kings routinely this season outshoot their opponents, but that certainly was not the case against the Calgary Flames. And it wasn't because the Flames defense was some kind of impenetrable wall. It wasn't because Calgary goaltender Jacob Markstrom stood on his head. No, the Kings just could not generate anything offensively in that opening period. And they had a total of 3 shots on goal in the first period. 3. That is clearly a season low for shots on goal in a period. Now, give some credit to Calgary for that, but still, it was just LA just could not seem to get into any kind of offensive flow or rhythm. Maybe it was due to the shakeup in the lineup, but hard to score when you only get 3 shots on goal. We talked about our keys to victory for the Kings against the Flames, and we talked about obviously the 60-minute effort because LA did not play 3 good periods against against Edmonton. You can't say it was a good 60-minute effort for the Kings in this one because they didn't play a good opening period at all, and the third period wasn't great as well. We talked about the Kings playing their game, and that meant defense out. Their identity is good defense, and the defense was spotty in this one. In particular, there was a really poor play by a defenseman, Vladislav Gavrikov, that let one of the Calgary players skate right around him for the opening goal of the game. That obviously wasn't very good. And then really easy for Calgary to get to the front of the net and then have a kind of a lucky bounce off one of their players and in for the second goal. And then the third key was who's going to step up with Adrian Kempe out. Now, we thought the nice line, which we'll talk more about in a minute, was going to be the line that the Kings would have to lean on. But I was looking at maybe a Quentin Byfield, maybe even a guy like Blake Lizotte, Pierre Dubois, somebody like that to step up and really make a big effort to pick up some of the slack with Adrian Kempe out. But unfortunately, that was not the case in this one against the Flames. So there was a quote I was going to mention from Quentin Byfield, and he was asked about the Kings having to play their first game without their leading scorer, Adrian Kempe. And Quentin Byfield had this to say, quote, "Yeah, Juice is huge for us, and he's heavy, fast, physical. He does everything. He can penalty kill, power play. That's a big guy to miss for us, and it showed out there that we need him. But other guys have got to step up, including myself, so it doesn't feel like we miss him that much," end quote. And unfortunately, there wasn't anybody you could really point at and say that player stepped up in the absence of Adrian Kempe. As far as the pluses and minuses in this one for the Kings, I think getting the first goal after a tough opening period kind of showed some nice resolve for LA. They then responded after allowing 2 straight goals to get that game tire going into the third period. We talk about the nice line. And by the way, I never liked that name for that line. Philip Deneau, Kevin Fiala, and Trevor Moore. They sure all seem to be nice guys, and they are nice players, but the nice line, I've never enjoyed that name. But anyway, clearly, like I said, they had to be the top line in this game. They were the most talented line, and they did come through, which was good to see, getting goals from Deneau, getting goals from Fiala. For Fiala, he's looked very good of late, 4 goals in his last 5 games. He now has 49 points. He's 2 points behind Adrian Kempe for the team lead. And I actually thought Cam Talbot was pretty solid in net. He finished with 33 saves. Unfortunately, the one goal you look at was the one that ended up being the game winner. That was a shot from distance from Calgary's Igor Sharangovich. There was some talk maybe it might have slightly deflected off the stick of defenseman Jordan Spence. I didn't see that, though. Anytime you let a game-winning goal in from above the face-off dots it didn't really look like much of a screen, or there was definitely no traffic in front. That's a tough one to give up. Otherwise, I thought he played pretty well. It'll be interesting to see who Jim Hiller goes with, though, against the Vancouver Canucks on Thursday. The minuses for the Kings, obviously, 3 shots on goal in the first period is a pretty big minus. And then they allowed a goal 48 seconds after you take the lead 1-0. And then the Flames scored 58 seconds after that. When you score a big goal on the road to get a lead, you need to gain momentum from that. And it almost seemed like it was the opposite for some reason. Now, the Kings continue to struggle in the second half of back-to-back games. They've played back-to-back times 8 times this season. And this was the first time the Kings lost both games of the back-to-back, losing to the Oilers on Monday and then the Flames on Tuesday. Kings were 7-0 in the first half of back-to-back games before that loss to the Oilers. Kings have now dropped 6 of 8 in the second half of the back-to-back games now with that loss to the Calgary Flames. Bottom line, we knew this 3-game road trip was going to be a tough one. Thought maybe the game against the Flames was probably the most winnable game of the 3, and the Kings don't get it done. Now you got to go to Vancouver, take on the top team in the league, and they're coming off an ugly loss. They're not going to be in a good mood. So on the one hand, you can understand the injury issues for the Kings right now are certainly taking their toll. On the other hand, it's professional sports. The guys get paid. They got to step up. You got to overcome those injuries, and the Kings have not been able to do it so far. So where are the LA Kings now, and how optimistic should we be about this team going forward? That's next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. I don't, because I use Gametime, the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. I have used Gametime this year to buy tickets to NHL and NFL games, and I am a very satisfied customer. Gametime has an app that is very easy to navigate and use. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and the best prices guaranteed. And Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. I love you can see your seat. You can view it on the app before you buy it, so you know exactly the view you're going to get. And Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They've got the all-in pricing, shows you the total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without any hidden fees. Buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps of the app. Just download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL, LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA and NHL players and games and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sports partner of the NBA. So, how do we feel about the LA Kings right now? Well, probably not great. But it's hard to know exactly what to feel about this Kings team going forward because there is so much uncertainty with these injuries. And you look at where the Kings are in the playoff race, and we'll detail that more in a moment. But I still am very confident that the Kings are going to make a playoff spot. But what they could do from there is a complete mystery. The injuries right now, we just don't have any information to go on. And you wonder, you think, oh, the Kings have all the answers, but when you're dealing with injuries, there's not absolutes every time. Maybe they think a couple of these guys will be back by the playoffs, but they don't know until the time comes and you see how they're feeling. That's why injuries can be such a wild card when it comes to these things, because you just don't know when they could strike and how long they're going to last. So the Kings have 9 days until the NHL trade deadline. There was a trade today we're going to mention briefly just to get you updated on what's been going on around the league, and it does involve a couple of teams that the Kings either are competing against for a playoff spot or could be playing in the first round of the playoffs. But right now, if you look at this Kings team as it is right now, 24 games left in the regular season. And this team that we've seen the last 2 nights, in particular, I guess, against Calgary because no Adrian Kempe, are you confident that this team is a threat to do anything in the playoffs? Hard to be, right? Hard to be that this lineup is going to do much. But is this going to be the lineup? And if it is, how does that affect what the Kings do before the trade deadline? Do the Kings know at this point? That's also something that is a huge question mark. How much do the Kings know as far as the status of Adrian Kempe and Victor Arvidsson and Mikey Anderson and to an extent, Carl Grundstrom? These are all key players, especially guys like Kempe and Arvidsson, and certainly Mikey Anderson, although he doesn't provide a lot of offense, plays a key role defensively for this team. Will they all be back for the playoffs? Will none of them be back for the playoffs? Is it going to be a couple of them are back and a couple of them we don't know? It's so difficult right now to know exactly what to think about what the Kings should do before the trade deadline and what they can expect to do when the playoffs come around. So the Kings do have some extra available cap space right now with Victor Arvidsson on LTIR. Could Adrian Kempe join him? It's certainly possible, and that could also help the Kings as well. But again, it all depends on what the projections are with them coming back or not. And the Kings have a better idea than you or I do at this point. But I don't know even if they know completely what the situation is. So I guess worst case scenario, let's say all those guys are out for the playoffs. And if you know that going up to the trade deadline, how can anyone honestly argue, even if you're the most optimistic Kings fan, and I consider myself a pretty optimistic fan, how could anyone argue that this lineup they have now is going to do anything in the playoffs? And I know you can look back to 2012 and you can say, well, the Kings were an 8 seed and nobody thought they had a chance in the playoffs and they go on to win the Stanley Cup. Yes, that's true. And that also helps to keep hope alive in some respects. But that team wasn't a team that was completely banged up with a bunch of holes in it because of injuries. So if that's the case, I don't know how the Kings look to make any kind of additions at the trade deadline, even if they do have the salary cap space. You have to wonder if they might be looking to move pieces, in particular Matt Roy, because he's probably going to walk at the end of the season as an unrestricted free agent, and you don't want to lose a key player like that for nothing. And there's a little bit of an indication of what he might be available on the market with another trade that went down today. Now, if the Kings are going to get Kempe and Arvidsson and Mike Anderson back for the playoffs, that's a completely different scenario then that you could understand with all three of those guys coming back. If they know that, then you are looking to make some tweaks, some additions, adding something at the deadline, and then you get those three guys back for the playoffs. I'll take my chances with that group going into the playoffs against another team that's going to be expected to win. Kings will still be a big underdog, but with that kind of talent on the roster, and the Kings certainly have nothing to lose, there's no pressure on them whatsoever, it could be a dangerous team. But again, that's a big if they're going to have those guys back healthy. And we just don't know at this point. So a lot to be figured out between now and the deadline, which is next Friday. And hopefully we can get some updates on what the injuries are so we can at least know what to expect somewhat. But right now, it's really, really, it's a gray area, to say the least, for the Kings. This is not a black and white situation. This is an evolving situation for the Kings based on what these injuries are at the moment and what they could be at the end of the year. So I teased it a little bit. There was an interesting trade today, and it certainly is of interest to the Kings, I think, on a number of different levels. First of all, it involves a team that is chasing the Kings for a playoff spot, and it could involve a team the Kings could face in the opening round of the playoffs. And it could also involve a player that could be kind of a comp for a player on the Kings that we may or may not be looking to trade. Okay, Chris Tanev, veteran defenseman for the Calgary Flames, was traded to the Dallas Stars for a prospect, a second-round pick, and a conditional sixth-round pick. I guess the New Jersey Devils were like a third team involved as well, and there was some salary retention and things like that. But ultimately, like I said, Chris Tanev goes from the Flames to the Stars for a prospect and 2 draft picks, a second-rounder and a conditional sixth-rounder. Now, technically, the Flames are still in the playoff race, which we'll tell you about in a moment, but they've made it clear what their intentions are at the end of the season. If they make the playoffs, great, but they're looking to better themselves for the future. And I thought they did a really good job in getting some decent pieces here for a player that they knew they were going to lose, and is a guy who's in his, I believe, mid-30s at this point as well. And they're not done. They're going to make some more moves as well. And for Dallas, they get a veteran defenseman who's a very solid player. It's not a move for the future. It's a move for now. And they're thinking about winning the Cup now. The Stars are right there in the mix in the West to make it to the Stanley Cup final, and they've added a good defensive piece, something that they were looking to do. So if you're going to do the whole who won the trade, certainly I would go Dallas in the short term. Who knows what these pieces could be in the long term for Calgary. But very interesting that the Stars definitely have helped themselves. Now, Chris Tanev is, I believe, 6 years older than Matt Roy. Matt Roy, I think if you're looking at what the Kings could get if they're looking to move him, certainly it would be more than a prospect, a second-round pick, and a conditional sixth-round pick, I would think, for Matt Roy, who's in his prime. Chris Tanev is, again, a very good player, but you've got him for now, and you're not really looking for the future. Matt Roy is a guy who could help a team now and in the future. So maybe an interesting comp for the LA Kings if they're trying to gauge the water as far as what they could get in return for a player like a Matt Roy, and would they be looking to get a first-round pick in return, something like that. I do have a little bit of Kings news to pass along, as well as looking at the playoff picture, and we will do that here next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. The LA Kings face the Vancouver Canucks on Thursday, 7 p.m. Pacific time. Catch every moment of the hometown broadcast to your LA Kings with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search LA Kings. Before we tell you exactly where the Kings are sitting in the playoff picture as we record today's show, there is one Kings-related note to pass along. The Ontario Reign announced that they have signed defenseman Luke Rowe to a contract. Now, Rowe is a Hobey Baker Award finalist known as the Hockey Heisman. That's awarded every year to the most outstanding player in men's college hockey. Now, he plays at the Air Force Academy, or he did. His team is moving on to the NCAA playoffs. However, he's ineligible to join them because his run of eligibility has expired. It's been over 60 days since he graduated, and apparently that's the threshold, and so he will not be able to join his team in the playoffs, so he has decided to sign a pro contract. Now, he was the Air Force Academy's team captain, 6'1" defenseman, had 6 goals and 23 assists for 29 points in 35 games. Now, I don't know what his service commitment is regarding his future. I did read online that Academy athletes, and this is for the Air Force Academy, the United States Military Academy, West Point, and also the Naval Academy in Annapolis, that players who are athletes can enter into selective reserves following 2 years of military service if there is a strong expectation their professional sports will provide the Department of Defense with significant favorable media exposure, likely to enhance national recruiting or public affairs. That's an exact quote from, the military when it comes to handling athletes at their service academies. I also, read that rule may have changed recently. So sounds like a very promising player, collegiate player the Kings have signed, Luke Rowe. But again, what his commitment can be going forward because of his commitment to the military, I'm not exactly sure about. So we'll keep an eye on that. But the Ontario Reign have added defenseman Luke Rowe, a Hobey Baker Award finalist from the Air Force Academy. Let's get you updated on the latest in the Pacific Division playoff race and the Western Conference as well. Last night, the Vegas Golden Knights beat the Toronto Maple Leafs 6-2. So Vegas currently has 73 points and sitting in second place in the Pacific Division. Edmonton has 70 points in third place, and the Oilers are hosting the Blues tonight. Kings are at 68 points after the loss to Calgary, so they're still 2 points back of the Oilers and now 5 points back of the Vegas Golden Knights. Nashville won their 6th game in a row last night, beating the Ottawa Senators 4-1. So they have pulled even with the LA Kings. Both the Kings and Predators have 68 points, but LA does hold the tiebreaker over Nashville because they have games in hand on the Predators, but they're still even in points. So LA has the number 1 wildcard spot for now. Nashville has the number 2 wildcard spot. Calgary, who beat the Kings, has 63 points. They jumped over St. Louis and Minnesota in the standings, but still 5 points back of both Nashville and LA for a wildcard spot. St. Louis and Minnesota are both stuck on 62 points. They both lost games last night. The Blues fell to the Jets, and the Wild lost to the Hurricanes. So we told you last night the Kings could only help themselves in the standings. They could not lose their place in the playoff picture regardless of the results, and that's exactly what happened. Yes, Nashville again caught the Kings in points, but LA 2 games in hand on Nashville with the tiebreaker. That said, the way both teams are playing at the moment, it wouldn't be much of a surprise to see the Predators grab that number 1 wildcard spot from LA as soon as Thursday, with the Kings playing in Vancouver and Nashville hosting Minnesota. If the playoffs started today, the Kings would still be the number 1 wildcard team, and they would face the Winnipeg Jets and Gabe Vilardi and company in the first round, because Winnipeg moved into a tie with first place Dallas, and they've got the tiebreaker over the Stars. So again, right now it would be the Kings versus the Jets in the first round of the playoffs. Now, if the Kings do end up losing that number 1 wildcard spot to Nashville, then their first round opponent as it stands right now would be the Vancouver Canucks. And that's a team the Kings are playing on Thursday. So that could potentially be a first round playoff preview as well. So for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on Thursday's show, we'll preview that Kings-Canucks matchup. And then, of course, on Friday, recap the game and have another LA Kings fan feedback show. You want to take part in that, we need you to get an email to us about whatever's on your mind involving the LA Kings. The email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And you can always leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comments section. We appreciate that. And we'd also love for you to stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We will talk to you on Thursday. And as always, go Kings, go.